If I believed in curses being put upon people or a nation, I would say that we are living under a curse. This last year or more has been horrific in many ways. First of all, we have a terrible coronavirus. Secondly, we have rioting in our cities and in our streets. And now we have the President of the United States being hospitalized for COVID-19. It's almost surreal. We get up in the morning and we say to ourselves, what is going to be next? When we hear these things, a lot of us may become concerned, a little bit nervous, but I don't think most of us can comprehend the full picture of what is going on. Our society seems to be coming apart. People are literally at each other's throats. Over these past days, some people have been making rather vicious and crude comments on social media regarding the president and what they hope will happen to him. So much so that social media has to sanitize what they say, remove it from Twitter or Facebook or TikTok or whatever else we have today. It's the perfect time for what I like to call the keyboard cowboys to say what they want and to think that they can get away with it. Let me be clear. Anyone that wishes another human being evil, and that includes the President of the United States, that person is evil and working for the evil one. Now, I talked about if I believed in curses, and I said, well, not really, but I do believe in the devil. And I believe that the devil is behind a lot of what is going on in our country today. You've heard these readings from both Isaiah and from the Gospel, and Jesus was well schooled in the Old Testament, but he was especially schooled in Isaiah. As a matter of fact, when he first gets up at the beginning of his ministry in the synagogue, he quotes the prophet Isaiah. This saying is being fulfilled in your hearing. And then in the suffering servant songs of Isaiah, he sees his own suffering and death. The Jewish people had a concept that Israel was a special place. It was the vineyard of the Lord. You hear those terms so many times, the vineyard of the Lord. It was his special protection. And they had a sense of Jewish exceptionalism. God chose us. He gave us the Torah, the law to live by, and we have the temple where God is present in a special way. Jesus reflects that in the gospel, this exceptionalism of Israel, but he said, you can lose Israel. You can lose the exceptionalism that God has given you because you're not obeying God. And that's what this is all about. I've sent you prophets time and time again, and you've treated them in a terrible way. You beat them, you kill them, and finally, I send my son, and look what you've done to him. And so Israel, although it was special to God, Israel was eventually conquered by the Romans, and in 70 it was destroyed. So much so for exceptionalism. But we Americans have the same concept, don't we? We hear the word American exceptionalism. Some people on the left don't like to hear that, but we have been an extremely blessed nation. And from the beginning, even with the Mayflower Compact, we had a biblical foundation. We are a city set on a hill, a light to the world. And indeed, for the most part, we have been. Not only have we tried to protect freedom in our own country, but we have tried to protect freedom and human rights around the world. We're not perfect, but we try. And a lot of people look to us for protection from those people who would like to destroy human rights, religious liberty, freedom. For some of us, we might remember studying about the Marshall Plan, rebuilt Europe after World War II. I wonder how many young people know about the Marshall Plan today. That's America. That's America. And that's what American exceptionalism means, that we're exceptional, not just for us, but a light for the whole world. A place where all people can say, God is present in that country, and God is using America to help those who are in need throughout the world. So people look to America, not just for financial aid. They look to America for moral insight, for spiritual support, believe it or not, and for good example. And yet, of late, I dare to say, it's getting harder and harder to find. There's a problem, Houston. We have a problem. Let me tell you what brought this out most clearly for me over this past week, and it seems to have drifted into the background since the announcement of President Trump's illness. It was the debate. There was one loser. It was the American people. The American people were the losers in that debate because the best of America was not portrayed in either candidate. What do we do when we are not at our best? We give scandal. Scandal to a whole country. And scandal most especially to a younger generation who thinks that that's how human beings in leadership positions should behave. Whether people like a politician or not, they are national leaders. Some people say, well, I love the president. And some say, I love the former vice president. But the fact of the matter is, whatever side you like, we find that people do imitate their leaders. We all imitate those people who we admire, who we think that they are on our side. And that happens from when we're very young. We might try to imitate our parents. As we get older, for some of us, it might be a sports hero or some famous entertainer. But politicians fit into that category. I wouldn't want my little boy or little girl to act like Mr. Trump or Mr. Biden, believe me. What do we do? How do we straighten things out? How do we get the ship back on course? Because we have to. We have to get this ship back on course, or else we're going to end up like Israel. We're going to be destroyed. Not from outside, but from within. We'll have a nation torn apart. People who cannot get along with each other. People who literally hate each other. And we can end up with another civil war if we're not there already. I had to look back in history to see some good examples of what should we do, what can be done. I went back to George Washington. George Washington, the father of our country. And I hope that young people are learning about him. There's a lot to learn. People oftentimes don't realize that Washington trained himself as to how to be a gentleman and a good human being, and how to treat other people, even those who are your opposition. Let me make this clear. When someone runs for office, they should never see their opposite as an enemy. The other person is an opponent, not an enemy. Washington, at 16 years old, came across a book, The Rules of Civility and Decent Behavior. It was written by the Jesuits in 16th century France. Believe it or not, the 16th century in France, telling people how to behave in a civil way toward one another. And Washington wrote it out. And he practiced it every day of his life, went over the points again and again. 110 points regarding civil behavior and the rules for decency. I'm not going to read to you 110 rules. Some of them, I'm sure, these days, if they're read as they were written in the 16th century, would seem somewhat archaic in their language, but certainly what goes behind the language is applicable to human beings of every age, including our own. Let me just give you some examples of what Washington studied in the rules of decency and good human behavior. Number one, every action done in company ought to be with some sign of respect to those that are present. How about that? You know who was present at that debate? I'm not talking about Chris Wallace. It was us. We were present at that debate. We were shown no respect. And that violates good behavior. You couldn't even understand what the candidates were talking about because of the shouting. Interruptions. Number 7, let your ceremonies in courtesy be proper to the dignity of a person's place and with whom you converse. For it is absurd to act the same way with a clown as with a prince. Mr. Biden telling the President of the United States to shut up, man, and calling him a clown. I don't think George Washington would have done that. Number 25. When another speaks, be attentive yourself and disturb not the audience. Be attentive. Neither listened, and both disturbed the audience. We have an example of a good president who practiced good behavior. Neither candidate right now is practicing good behavior, nor can they compare with the first and greatest of our presidents. Role modeling is important. Each of you should go to your computer and take a look at the rules of civility and good behavior and try to translate them into your life and pass them on to your children. That's the way we begin to rebuild American society. But there was another president, perhaps equally as great, and that was Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln presided over this country at a time when Americans were literally killing each other. Tremendous hatred between the North and the South. And in his first inaugural address in 1860, President Lincoln said, and these are important words, words that every politician should remember, and every one of us should pass on in training ourselves and our children. Lincoln said, and I quote, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic chords of memory will swell when again, touched as they surely will be by the better angels of our nature." My dear people, we as Americans can do a lot better. I hope that you will encourage your politicians to listen to the words of Washington and Lincoln, and then pray that this exceptional nation may survive this time of crisis. God love you.